We need to create an anti-inflammatory protocol that's really supportive. Movement, stress regulation, sleep. I tell people, protect your sleep like it's $1 million meeting. Nobody, except for my son, gets to mess with my sleep routine. Nobody. Like, once the door is shut, it's over. Like, don't come to me with, hold it till the morning. It's not important enough.
In your work, in your practice, Mariza, what are you seeing is the first thing that people feel when they're transitioning into perimenopause that they may not even recognize as such?
I would say the most common across the board is a lack of stress resilience. All of a sudden, things that felt like they could just roll off their shoulder, the list that most of us are handling every single day, just starts to feel heavier. And you feel more triggered, you feel more irritated, and you're just like, well, gosh, that used to not irritate me. Like, I wouldn't be irritated by 5 p.m. I wasn't, I didn't feel like I needed to chop my partner's head off at 7 o'clock in the evening. And so that's one of the first things I think a lot of women will notice. And I think it has a lot to do with that slow, precipitous decline of progesterone that starts to affect our brain and our stress response system.
So for many years now, you've worked with women in perimenopause using a holistic approach and centering it sometimes like the real value of essential oils. Can you talk a little bit about that when it comes to that stress resilience? Because I do think that the first symptoms I'm also seeing as well are cognitive and brain-based and nervous system-based. And I was having a happy hour with some friends the other day. And
what are they, mocktails?
Yes, I certainly do not drink anymore. Absolutely. Although, again, that's another thing that people don't realize. It's like, is it, why can I not suddenly tolerate alcohol very well? And why? And so one of the big complaints is like, I'm feeling all ragey against my whole family. So it's this brain, nervous system, mental health, stress resilience. I think that, essential oils and other tools like that can help modulate our vagus nerve are some of our best initial tools. So what's kind of your perspective on how do we start with addressing those things?
Yeah, let's go in. So let's just talk about the stress response system, that kind of irritation, the rage, the mood swings. We know that a big part of that is that declining hormone, or these hormones are declining. And there's a lot of tools. One of the ways that I like to think about it is sending our brain safety signals. And also, I love hormones too. Like, a little progesterone goes a long way. But so one of my favorite tools for sending a safety signal is going to be an essential oil. I always say that people can choose their mood. And I even say this to my 3-year-old. He gets to choose his mood, right? It's about regulating our system and nourishing and nurturing our system. And sometimes we just need a little reset. For my son, it's a mama hug, like, is a reset. And I think that an oxytocin boost for any of us, whether it is your kids or your partner or your dog or your kitten or whatever it may be, your best friend, like, that's a great way of helping to reset. But if none of those are available at the moment, and you're in your car and you're late to a meeting or whatever that thing is, or you just got off the phone with your boss and you just want to scream in a pillow, I also say, hey, go scream in a pillow. Like, when I'm especially feeling ragey, and that definitely happens. It doesn't happen all the time in my what I call late luteal phase, but it does happen sometimes. I just scream in a pillow, or I scream in my car. Like, that is absolutely appropriate. But in moments where maybe family's around and I don't really have the luxury of doing something like that, I do love grabbing oils. And so one of my absolute favorite kind of calming, I always think of florals. Florals is very calming. And the cool thing about essential oils, they're kind of similar. They work in the similar way as adaptogens work. And I love adaptogens as well. I love holy basil tea. I love rhodiola. I love ashwagandha. I love, so bringing in adaptogens, I think, can be great neuromodulators and stress response system neuromodulators as well. And so definitely supplementing those are great, but this is instantaneous, right? We kind of have to take adaptogens for a while for them to really start doing their thing. And sometimes I need something to work in 10 seconds.
Yeah.
Like, that's how quick. And so breathing in rose oil or lavender or jasmine or clary sage, all of these oils have been researched to go into the limbic system and really kind of reset that stress response system from a sympathetic nervous system mode, so that fight or flight, I'm about to chop heads, to a much more calming parasympathetic state. And so I'm a big fan of all the tools in the toolbox. I do breath work twice every month. I have a EMDR therapist. I have a sauna. I walk. I send voice memos. I scream into pillows, and then I also use oils. And so any of those, I mean, I'm a big fan of, again, safety signals wherever they come from, to help support and modulate that stress response system. But I find that if we can keep our nervous system regulated, that's such a big part of this journey in creating more ease and grace for us, and just feeling more, not only more at home in our bodies, but also feeling okay in our home and in our families and all the things that are going on.
Yes, I think that's so valuable. So, you mentioned, and I completely agree, that in many cases, using supplemental hormones directly is a great tool. But I think it's important to note that that's often either not enough,
It's not enough.
or you need some support to help metabolize those additional hormones, supplemental hormones, even if they are bioidentical and delivered in the right way and all of that. So, and the fact that we know the research shows us that as estrogen declines, we have certain menopausal symptoms, but people with low estrogen, with regulated nervous systems measured by heart rate variability or HRV, do not have the same symptoms as people with low estrogen plus dysregulated heart rate variability or nervous system regulation. So I think that checklist is really important. It's almost like every woman at 35 should be handed like a workbook, a checklist that says like,
Yeah.
are you walking in nature? Are you petting your dog? Or do you have a
A
floral
best friend.
scented oil that you can
Yes.
smell? Do you have a best friend that you can voice memo or go to a mocktail happy hour with? Like, these nervous system regulating tools are actually really important medicine that I think get kind of pushed under the rug. It's like you just need the right hormone.
I wish it was just that. I mean, I'm doing all the things. For me, and just to be, very transparent, not only in my own journey, but in a lot of the women that I work with, I've never met a woman with a regulated nervous system. And I'm just going to share that. And I myself, well, I have a very deregulated nervous system. I was chronically abused as a child, my entire childhood, and so I have, what do they call it?
High,
A,
like
a
a
a type of
score.
PTSD. Yeah,
Yeah.
so I have a score of an 8,
Mm.
and so I came into this world, with a deregulated nervous system of never feeling safe. And in a lot of ways, it's shown up in a really, I've kind of, in the way of high performance, it's a lot of accolades. Like I've checked a lot of those boxes, but because I've always been very vigilant,
Mhm.
and besties and friends of mine are like, "Oh my, Mariza, your follow up is amazing. You always get back to us. You're our best resource." And I'm like, "Oh, that's just trauma." Like, and
Yeah.
just, but coming into my 30s, especially wanting to get pregnant, with my son I had my son at 41.
Mhm.
Even in my late 30s, my progesterone levels, well, let's just be honest, my progesterone levels have never looked great on paper.
Mm.
But my system has always been deregulated. And so, especially as I started to feel some of those subtle changes in my late 30s, for me, regulating my nervous system has always needed to be, it gets to be intentional. I get to, so there's a lot of things that I build into my day every day that ensures that I'm sending beautiful safety signals to a little brain that wants to find emergency in everything in life. And so that's what I'm always offering my women is, I don't, again, I find that most women are coming into the menopausal transition, not only with a bit of a dysregulated nervous system, but also with so many big demands.
Mm.
I just polled in Instagram a couple weeks ago how many women in perimenopause were moms.
Mm.
And it was 1,000 women responded, and 85% of women who were in perimenopause had children that were in school still, like they were still tending to them. I think, I want to say 10% children were out of the household, and 4% or so had kids in perimenopause. So they were postpartum in their 40s, like me,
Yeah.
because that's its own little journey. And so I'm always just very curious, like how high, what are the stacks of demands for this particular group of women, for the millions of us out there, and then how are we tending to that when we're kind of designed to tend to our children first, and tend to all the things that come with it. And so what does it look like for us tend to our nervous system so that we show up in a way, not only for our own bodies, but also for our family. Because I know that us as moms, we really do want to show up as the best moms. We want to show up as the best friends and the best partners. And, how do we bring our best by loving ourselves and giving our best to ourselves too?
Yeah, I think that's such important data. So you mentioned a few key things. One is that I think it's really valuable for people to know what their ACE score is. You can Google this online. There's a very simple screening tool, and that is your adverse childhood experiences. And there's a lot of research showing that if you have adverse childhood experiences, especially quite young, but also this flares if they happened around puberty and or around pregnancy. Those adverse childhood experiences or young adult or adult experiences kind of decrease the set point of your nervous system resilience. And so if you're starting a little bit behind the starting line, if you will,
Yeah.
and then you tend to have some kind of trauma response. And in my community, and it sounds like yours as well, a lot of that is high achievement, hypervigilance, peak performance, have challenges with really resting and recovering and going with the
Have high
flow,
standards.
high standards. Yeah. And
Yeah.
and that's there's some positive rewards of that, but there's
Sure.
also
Society loves it.
society loves it. And it's daily and chronically over a long term by the time you're in your 40s,
Exhausting.
stress. Yeah.
Yeah, and you feel it. It's exhausting. At least for me, in my own personal experience, it feels like something's just chipping away at you over time. And yeah, there's nothing like coming into the perimenopause transition. I call it the reckoning
Yeah.
with that level of deregulation in your nervous system, right? Because if we haven't had an opportunity to really tend to ourselves and again create these beautiful safety brain signals via self-care or all these strategies that you and I have been talking about, it can feel like someone just pulled the rug from under you.
Yes. And in a recent episode, I spoke with Dr. Elisa Song, who works with children. And it would be awesome if absolutely every child got to work with her, because there's this idea of training those regulatory responses, whether it's with essential oil or breath work or acupuncture, acupressure tools we talked about this a lot, like in middle school and late elementary school. Our children, we're always trying to kind of buffer their stress for them, but we actually have to teach them the tools of buffering stress. But if you grew up as a woman in your 30s, 40s, 50s now, without an environment where you were kind of taught to regulate your
Regulate.
nervous system in an effective and adaptive way. A lot of people were taught to eat sugar, or they were kind of like, go in your room and figure it out for yourself. It was rare that you had like a parent or a caregiver sit and do breathing with you or sit with you while you navigated that pain and went through it, or gave you some of these tools like nature exposure or cuddle with your dog or whatever. And I think that we now have to teach ourselves in perimenopause and menopause, because as you said, it's the reckoning where the support that we had for our metabolic system, our immune system, our nervous system, of our estrogen and progesterone levels gets wiped out. And it doesn't get wiped out like neatly. It gets wiped
No,
out really messy.
erratically.
Yeah.
I always say there is nothing predictable about the menopause transition. It's a time of unpredictability. Um, and yeah, creating scaffolding around that to support us in that level of unpredictability. I also say it's a time for review. Like everything is up for review. Like there's no sacred cows here.
So true.
Except your children.
Yeah. I mean, of course, you're going to keep taking care of
Of
children, but
course.
you may even rethink because
Rethink how you're
how
doing
you're
that.
helping them
Yeah.
regulate and all
Yeah.
of that. But I do think you're absolutely right. I mean, I think there's some benefit to sort of feeling yourself without those crutches, if you will, of estrogen
Mhm.
and progesterone, even temporarily, like noticing what in your life is irritating you. Should that actually change? So in your own assessment, has there been anything like, I really need to do this differently, or I need to let go of this, or, something that you see commonly with your clients or community?
Yeah, I think a big part is I think particularly women, have been conditioned to really bully ourselves,
Mm.
to just, you know, just do it, just grit it out. And there's a lot of negative self-talk. I can't tell you how many women come to work with me and they just really want me to know that they're not lazy.
Mm.
They really want me to know that they've been really trying, that they're not you know, just dropping the ball. And that breaks my heart because I've never met a woman who hasn't been trying. And so one of the things that I recommend is really, that come through, because this is a hard time. I'll no problem admitting I'm in week 4. I'm in late luteal right now.
Mm-hmm.
And
Of
I
the
remember a
menstrual
dear friend of
phase for
ours.
those who don't
Yeah,
speak
so
so
right
late,
before my
yeah, right
period.
before your period. Yeah.
And in peri, it's everything it's all of it gets lit up is how I describe it. Like, and I was so funny. I was looking at Dr. Stephanie Estima had a little post, and she was doing a workout, and she, late luteal phase, you're not pushing as hard. And so she was saying, tell me you're in week 4 without telling me you're in week 4. And she alluded to, like, these little subtle things. And I was like, oh, everybody knows when I'm in week 4. Let me tell you, like, it's not a surprise. It's not subtle. Okay, I'm coming in swinging. Um, and so I think, for so many of us in let's say even in week 4, or maybe post ovulation, if you have an ovulatory month in the perimenopause transition, that or a day that you have a migraine, or a day where you feel your cortisol awakening response just isn't there. You wake up and you just can't get out of bed. I think what's important is that we set the table with self-trust, self-love, and coming from a place of surrender.
Mm.
So let's say yesterday I had a really bad migraine, and the day before, I knew that yesterday I was going to work out. I was going to do a big weight training workout, because I'm not trying to lose my muscle mass. I'm trying to maintain my metabolic flexibility, and I really want to be strong and powerful and resilient for as many possible years as I can. And so training with heavy weights is very much on, it's a part of my weekly routine. But I woke up with a migraine yesterday, and my come through was that wasn't going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
That just wasn't happening yesterday. And 10 years ago, I would have beaten myself up, and I probably would have done it anyway. Would have been really subpar, and it would have been super hard, and I would have felt awful on the other side, but I would have done it. And today, um, coming in with a deep knowing, like knowing my body, trusting my body's telling me, girl, don't even think about that weight room. Today's a walk.
Yeah.
Today's a gentle walk. Today is gentle breath. Today is being gentle on yourself and on your brain. I always want to start my day setting the table with how am I going to show up with compassion, and how am I going to pivot today based on how I'm feeling? And so that's one of the things I always love to bring to my patients and my clients is, like, let's set the table coming from a place of compassion and love versus bullying ourselves into something that ultimately is not going to serve us over time.
Yeah. And I think that, when we develop that practice of self-compassion, because you have to unlearn what you were doing before for 40 years, sometimes you're going to get it right. Sometimes you're going to get it wrong, but the recovery is that much faster. So we were talking a bit about the most common early symptoms of perimenopause, the rage, the mood swings, the brain fog. Talk a little more about some of those more cognitive and brain-based symptoms that you see.
I mean, all of it. But yeah, let's break it down. So, if it isn't a lack of stress resilience that you notice, the other thing I see a lot is a lack of word recall. So,
Mm.
long term memory. All of a sudden, they're just not able to pluck out whatever it is that you want to say. This has very much been an experience for me, especially with a brain injury last summer.
Mm.
And that rocked my world. As a woman, when we're firing off, I call it firing on all cylinders, where you're just like, you're just like, our brains just work so fast. Everyone I've ever met, they're just slaying dragons left and right. um, and then one day you can't slay though. You're all of a sudden you're not just slaying dragons every three, and like your brain is just not firing the way that you are used to it firing. And that word recall, you're not remembering where something is, or you're not remembering the word that you want, or the sentence that you want. So brain fog is a big one that I'll see, of just either alertness or a lack of concentration. But most importantly, the thing that I think really rocks women's worlds is that lack of word recall, or that long-term memory. And then the other thing is just overall, I think a lot of us, when we check in with our energy levels, I think what we're really measuring is our mental energy.
Mm.
Because I think that's really where our capacity is, of just being able to do so many things. And that's what begins to feel very draining. It's like we're just not able to pull that mental energy that we used to be able to pull.
I think women are at this age often carrying many things. They have big jobs. They have multiple children. They all need different things. They're caregivers for aging parents. They're managing financially. They're making dinner every night. Like, there's a lot you're always sort of carrying in your head. And of course, this is where the reckoning comes in, right? You're sort of reassessing where and when you want to be doing all of these things. But at some level, that's just a part of this phase of life. And I think that's what feels really slippery with this is like, ooh, how come I can't do that anymore?
Yeah, and it's a lot of, as just speaking into what society has wanted from us is the mental bandwidth that requires. Yesterday, I was making a decision for Kingston Gymnastics on scheduling,
Mm-hmm.
but I was also ordering his shoes. I was planning dinner. I was preparing for today's interviews. I was checking it. Alex needed me to pay for something, da 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 da, and I just, it's all over. It's not like I'm just centrally focused on one thing. I'm juggling multiple things, and then also tending to my preschooler at the same time. And so, yeah, it's a layer of so many things. And so when you feel like that foundation that you had isn't fully there, it's very scary. At least for me, it was very scary. I was like, oh my gosh. And you get to recalibrate in a way. I mean, some things are still non-negotiable. So, I'm a big fan of delegating, like asking my husband Alex, can you carry this for me? Like, can you hold this for me? Giving him ownership. And even that is a level of mental delegation.
Yeah, you have to trust that they're going to do it, which I think a lot of women have trouble with.
Yeah. And you have to be thinking about the thing that you want to hand over to your partner.
Right. You have to sort
So,
of manage it, if you will. You have to
yeah, in
package
a
it
way.
and hand it over. Yeah.
So even that requires mental bandwidth. And so yeah, I think that in a time where we are the busiest, our life is very, very full, navigating a lot of big, big life experiences, including the things that light us up, that it can be disarming to feel like our mental capacity isn't where it was. The other thing I think is really disarming, I'll never forget watching my mom go through perimenopause. I always say that it was like a nightmare unfolding.
Mm.
And it was more the emotional tumultuousness that she was going through. And they were years where for like that 4 days prior to her period, she wouldn't even leave the house because she was afraid she was going to hurt somebody.
Mm.
Like she's really severe.
Mm.
And she eventually went to a doctor and asked, like, is it normal for someone to want to kill everybody for like 4 to 5 days? Like that, the rage was so bad. And her doctor, luckily enough, validated it. But this is at a time where we really didn't have solutions for that,
Yeah.
you know? So she was validated, but just was sent home
Yeah.
to continue to live like that. And so a lot of women experience rage. Again, we talked about the irritability, higher levels of anxiety. We even see ADHD increase, depression increase. I want to say it's like over 60% of women start to experience depression in perimenopause. And so a lot of mood shifts and changes that can feel kind of unexpected, or at least just much more severe than it's ever been before.
Yeah. And this is where I am more of a proponent, I know you are as well, of adding hormone therapies because, our parents' generation, our mother's generation didn't really have that because of the Flaw Women's Health Initiative study. And as much as it's very important to also regulate the nervous system and not
Yes.
just, I'm not really a fan of kind of medication mill, like everybody gets hormones without really thinking about it and talking about it and discussing everything we're talking about here. Like, what do you want to reassess in your life? How healthy is your digestion and your liver and your brain? And,
Your
really
gut,
getting,
yeah, I get what you
your
said.
gut,
Yeah.
like getting healthier. But on top of that, we now know that these tools are intensely valuable. So talk a little bit about some of the things that you've seen improve, adding, whether it's topical estradiol or progesterone, that are readily available now, but are vastly underprescribed, in addition to the mental health improvements.
Well, I mean, you think about in the last 20 years since the Women's Health Initiative in 2002 that kind of shut it all down, right? Over like 75% of women came off of hormone replacement therapy at that time. And that was very much, my mom was in that 20-year, she was literally right after that is when she was going through perimenopause and would have benefited. What we saw an uptick in, or what we've seen an uptick in, is medications for depression and anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what we've seen the replacement of hormones have been anti-anxiety medications. what I've seen over the last couple of years, and again, just note that even a couple of years ago, only 4% of women in the US were on hormone replacement therapy, and now it's 6%. So we
Yeah.
are seeing an uptick in
But
that,
it's
but even still,
still
it's still very low.
6%. Yeah.
6%
Which is
of the
crazy.
millions of women.
Yeah.
I just, full disclosure, I just want to share a little bit about I'm 44. I'll be 45 in a couple of months. I had my son when I was 41. So up until last year, I was breastfeeding very much in postpartum, and then just kind of got like shoved into perimenopause, and progesterone she was gone. She disappeared. So progesterone was one of the first things I was able to get on to kind of manage the rage and the mood swings, and just to support my stress resilience with all the other things that we were talking about. I've those have always been practices of mine. So I believe it's a yes and.
Mm-hmm.
It just gets to be a yes and.
Yeah.
And then something I haven't shared that I find happens to a lot of women in perimenopause, is an uptick in migraines
Mm-hmm.
and just inflammation,
Yeah.
neuroinflammation. That's why we see an increase in autoimmune conditions in perimenopause. We just when we're talking about erratic hormones, we see an increase in inflammation across the board, but particularly in the brain. So for me, I was averaging 15 to 20 migraines a month.
Mm.
Predominantly in the luteal phase, almost every day in the luteal phase of my cycle, and then around ovulation, or maybe sometimes anovulation, no ovulation.
Right.
And it just medicate. I wasn't interested in a lot of medications. I've had them since I was 7, but obviously in perimenopause, they have really taken a big step up.
Mm-hmm.
So I was following a dear friend of mine, Dr. Felice Gersh, who recommends estradiol for menstrual migraines, or perimenopausal migraines, and started literally 2 months ago. I started on estradiol as a solution for migraines, and have gone from 15 to 20 a month down to 2.
Oh, that's great. That's really good.
So
Mm-hmm.
that, just trying to figure that out. But what I've seen, so I've seen migraines get significantly better, brain fog. My brain is working so much better. I feel like that's a side benefit. I'm
Yeah.
like, I'll take it.
Yeah.
Mood stability. So just more stable mood across the board, especially in that what would consider to be kind of that luteal phase, where I find that mood just gets to be a little bit more unstable, especially if you're still cycling in your kind of early perimenopause, heading into late perimenopause. Although I like to break it up early, middle, and late,
Mm-hmm.
because the jump from early to late perimenopause feels like a really big jump. Like there's a lot of gray middle there. So I've seen weight. I've seen a lack, more muscle definition. So women are maintaining more of their muscle mass, less body composition changes as well, more insulin sensitivity. So I'm always looking at those markers as well. Less inflammation across the board. Again, as long as we're supporting the liver, we're supporting the gut, we've got these other lifestyle strategies connected in with hormones. I believe that hormones are vast optimizers.
Yeah.
They're not going to be the only fix all. I do believe that if it's because of hormones that we're losing some of that, emotional resilience, that mental resilience, then why wouldn't we try to bring those in along with some lifestyle strategies before turning to SSRIs or some type of, antidepressant or anti-anxiety medication?
Yes. And that's so important because, as you mentioned, up until very recently, it was something like 25% of all women in their 40s were on an antidepressant medication. And the problem with that is it doesn't work that well. We were still having increases in midlife suicides. We were still having increases in depression and anxiety. And so I think it's really powerful to see how few women, even now, because of the long tail of the Women's Health Initiative, the concerns that women have about using hormone therapy is that there's still only a use of 6% when they can, starting in perimenopause, are the safest. And if you're taught to, and I'm hoping that this conversation is really going to amplify this, start looking in your 30s, 40s, because a lot of times women also don't see menopause until they're like, oh, menopause, that's like when you're 50 or 60, right? They think it's much later than it is, but you were still postpartum and early 40s and feeling these brain symptoms of menopause. And sometimes it's, as you said, sort of slow and messy and long, 10, 15 years of perimenopause. But we also have some women who it happens to more abruptly. And that was more of my story. I was, in kind of like a mild perimenopause. I had some changes in my cycles, not a lot of symptoms. And then I got COVID, and it was a very rapid, I had one or two kind of mini cycles after that. And that was it. It was just like menopause. So that was also uncomfortable.
Yeah, very. I mean, talk about getting supercharged over into menopause, with all the profound changes that happen. I think it's really important that women understand that whether you have symptoms or not in perimenopause, your body systemically has changed.
Yeah.
That reproductive system of ours that is a fifth vital sign. And when we start to lose, our ovarian capacity, our ovarian function, and it has a profound impact on every symptom, every system of the body, every organ system of the body. And so I always want to let women know that whether you breezed through it or it was so tumultuous, you were like, when do I get to get off this roller coaster ride? Your body on the other side of menopause or post-menopause is a very different body, because it's not binding to those critical hormones anymore. And so I hope that's the biggest message we walk away from this, is that it's a reconfiguration. It's a recalibration of every single organ system in the body. I think most importantly, the brain.
Yes. And even the cardiovascular system. This is why, because we talked about it helping the more immediate symptoms, the current migraines, the current mental health symptoms, the current brain fog,
Sleep issues.
Yeah, we could do a whole episode
All
on
day.
sleep. And I think the more important thing is for people who feel like they didn't really have symptoms at this time, they breeze through it, if you will, they still, because of that estrogen decline and progesterone decline, have a higher risk of dementia, which is much more common in women. They have higher risk of cardiovascular disease, high blood pressure, bone fracture, metabolic issues like diabetes and prediabetes, and especially if you had either PCOS and or gestational diabetes, or even preterm labor
or preeclampsia. Mm-hmm. These are all warning signs.
They are. And we don't think about pregnancy as being predictive of what could happen postmenopausally. So I think that what you and I are both saying is that every woman, no matter what her symptoms are, should take stock in perimenopause and menopause and talk to their clinicians, talk to one of us, talk to someone on their health team about considering using hormone therapies, because the data is so strong about their benefit and prevention long term, with, as you said, kind of the added bonus of, oh, by the way, you can find your words again.
Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of women are heading to use hormone replacement therapy for symptom management. Mm-hmm. And that is the way it's being prescribed as standard of care within the medical system right now. We're not really looking at it as a preventative.
Yeah.
We're looking at it as symptom management. And honestly, I'll take what we can get. Like, I want us to be thinking about it. Yeah. I want you, as you're listening to this, to be thinking, I should be thinking about hormone replacement therapy as a preventative to neurodegeneration, as a preventative to bone loss, as a preventative to cardiovascular, inflammation or risk factors, as a preventative to metabolic syndrome, along with lifestyle, making sure that we keep inflammation checked. And as a side benefit, yes, let's manage those symptoms as well. But those symptoms are, to me, a lot of these symptoms are a subtle calling card for metabolic issues. At the end of the day, if everything runs through our cellular energy, our mitochondrial energy, and we start to see that shift and change, potentially in an unfavorable direction in the perimenopausal transition, to me, even as early as our 30s, it's something that we get to look at. So if I could wave a magic wand across the world for all the women, it would be that we are looking at labs. We are really looking at these biomarkers even as early as our 30s, so that we can have a timeline about what is going on with your body. We're bringing in the optimizers, we're bringing in the lifestyle strategies, so that not only is that perimenopausal transition a little bit more ease and grace, not this crazy tumultuous roller coaster. It's more like the kiddie coaster that my son goes on, versus
absolutely
the crazy roller coaster at Magic Mountain. And that we head into menopause, with good biomarkers, with optimal biomarkers. And as much as for a woman who's dealt with I'm dealing with perimenopausal symptoms, and let me tell you, my metabolic labs are a chef's kiss. So it's a yes and. Do I get to bring on hormone replacement therapy and make sure that I'm optimizing my metabolic health? Yes and. Because I know that we see once women get into their early to mid 60s, it can really be a downhill slope from there. We start to see osteoporosis. We begin to see C-reactive protein much higher than it needs to be. We start to see an increase in prediabetes, and again, we start to see scary numbers around their arterial walls. We start to see carotid artery scores not looking super great, and so I really want to know, like, what in this transition can we do to be preventative for when we hit our early to mid 60s. I have one of my best friends has a little boy who's just a little bit younger than my son. And her mom and my mom are the same age.
Mhm.
And I've been taking care of my mama since what I call the zone of chaos, since her perimenopause journey. I took over that situation, and my mom had a crazy 180,
Mhm.
gorgeous 180. Like,
Oh, good.
she trains, weight trains. She's got great metabolic levels. She runs marathons. She is robust. She's the epitome of vitality,
Oh, that's great.
and she could throw my child in the air. Her grandson, race with my grandson, do all that her grandson. My best friend's little boy, her mother is the same age. She cannot pick up her grandson,
Mm.
who's 28 pounds,
Mm.
and she doesn't feel comfortable watching him unless there's another adult present,
Yeah.
because she's afraid that if something happens to her grandson, she may not be able to do what she needs to do to take care of him.
Yeah. And you're exactly right. And these things start earlier than we
They start
think.
early.
I
Yeah.
think this is a message that's really important because women who are not metabolically optimized in their 40s, by the time they're 60, can have early stage dementia. Women's cardiac arrhythmias are on the rise. Women's colon cancer is on the rise, even in midlife. Women's strokes are on the rise
On the rise.
because of exactly what you're saying. We have so many things contributing to metabolic dysregulation, everything from our toxin exposures to the foods that we eat to the lack of stress management and nervous system regulation, that preparing all of that in our 30s and 40s is like so key. And as you said, then, you and I both have these like perfect metabolic labs, and yet still symptomatic. I had plenty of hot flashes. I had some sleep disturbance, and it took that next level of optimizing with hormones, but so much more effectively, lower doses needed. It helped more quickly when you have that baseline of resilience. And I think even if you're in your 70s or 80s, I've seen this with my mom, and she had a hip fracture because she has pretty significant osteoporosis at this point, but she had been exercising for years. Like during the pandemic, she was walking 10 miles a day on beach and surfaces. And, it doesn't take, you don't even have to be an Olympic athlete, just everyday walking, everyday functional activity, functional mobility, and functional strength training. And she was able to fully recover from that, where, about 50% of women in their 70s who have a hip fracture will die from it.
Yeah, within 5 years.
Yeah. So that recovery, even if your mom is such a perfect example, my mom too, in that the more resilience you have, even though they didn't get the benefit of hormones, they're still able to recover and be functionally active and, travel. I mean, we've been all over, she's lived all over the world. We walk on cobblestone streets without like fear.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we get to be honest that not everyone's going to be a candidate
Mm-hmm.
for hormone replacement therapy.
Yeah.
And, I know those women are wondering, well, what about me? And it's very much what we're talking about. Again, hormone replacement therapy. I mean, if you're a candidate, I want you to be looking at those options, having those conversations as early as perimenopause. None of us deserve to suffer needlessly.
Yeah.
None of us. And if you have symptoms, it's a worthy conversation. And we need to support that gut microbiome that's shifting and changing because of peri. We need to create an anti-inflammatory protocol that's really supportive. Movement, stress regulation, sleep. I tell people, protect your sleep like it's $1 million meeting. Nobody, except for my son, gets to mess with my sleep routine. Nobody.
Yeah.
And once the door is shut it's over. Like, don't come to me with, hold it till the morning. It's not important enough.
Yeah.
And, having deep connections, like those are the things. And so we it's a yes and. So if you're not able for whatever reason to be on hormone replacement, I just want you to know, I hope you take from this conversation as well, that there is a lot that you can do to stack the deck in your favor, to reduce that inflammation, to protect your brain and heart, to protect your bones, and to feel like you're alive and strong and resilient. So this isn't just, it's a one or, it's not a, it's a, there's a lot that we get to do to take care of our bodies.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for this encouragement, for sharing your story, for giving women in their early to mid 40s who are like, I've lost my
I
brain,
do.
so much hope that they can fully get it back because you have been fully sharp in this entire interview. So,
Thanks, Annie.
yeah. So, what resources do you have to share? Where can people find you and learn more about your work?
Yeah, so I have a really great again, I think one of the things, I hope the through line that came through today was our metabolic health. And one of the best ways to understand that, besides the subtle symptoms and signs, you feeling exhausted or you're feeling sluggish, is to really be looking at those biomarkers, because metabolic syndrome and cardiovascular disease, they're silent.
Yeah.
Even insulin resistance,
Yeah.
it's silent. And so I think it's important to know the type of biomarkers and lab ranges that, are really dialed for your body, like optimal lab ranges. So often doctors will just be like, "Oh, everything's normal," and it's not normal. If your blood sugar or your hemoglobin A1C is touching pre-diabetes, and your doctor continues to keep telling you everything is normal, it's not normal. I wouldn't even see I even think pre-diabetes is diabetes
Yeah.
as far as I'm concerned. But why are we even calling it pre-diabetes? And so many women walk out of their doctor's offices and are just like, I don't feel good, and yet I'm being told things are just fine. So I have a metabolic lab assessment that gives you optimal ranges. It gives you everything you need to kind of figure out for yourself, is this something I'm dealing with right now? And then what can I do next? So I have that little lab guide, but you can find me on Insta at Dr. Mariza, Drmariza. And I have a podcast that Jessica's about to be on called Energized with Dr. Mariza as well. And it's literally, this is who I'm serving. I'm serving you. This is what I'm talking about all day long.
That's fantastic. And I'll put in the show notes the links for everything for people to easily find you and that metabolic lab checklist. That is fantastic. I mean, if you were 30 years old, actually any age, but if you're a
Any age.
30-year-old woman or above, like this is the time to start knowing your numbers and your baseline and then check it every year, every other year, and keep on pace of that, because then you're going to see when perimenopause is starting to impact your
Those
metabolic
numbers.
function at those very early stages, like just a slight uptick in that hemoglobin A1C or that fasting
Or
glucose.
triglycerides, or
Yeah.
yeah, fasting glucose or fasting insulin, and if you can't get a fasting insulin, you can always I always tell people, just divide your triglycerides by your HDL, getting that ratio. I ideally would love it under a 2. And I share that in the guide as well. And so there's ways, again, if your doctors won't run certain things, I really take all of that into account inside of this guide, because I know sometimes it can be really hard, even when you're advocating for yourself, to get what you need. And so there's workarounds. And then I make sure to include all of that.
Oh, fantastic. This is gold. So definitely go to the show notes, download that guide, follow Dr. Mariza on Instagram, and thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks for having me.